Okay. Right, welcome everyone to the May meetup of the Sussex Azure user group. Particularly warm welcome if you're new to our group and have never joined one of our sessions before. You're more than welcome. My name's Ryan. I work for Microsoft. Jack, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Jack Tracy. I'm also now work for Microsoft, so nearly a month in. So yeah, you're all welcome.
Just got some kind of housekeeping and general slides that we typically do as part of our user meets up. Obviously, we're used to doing these via person, face to face, and we kind of switched to webinar because of the whole pandemic piece. But yeah, so just a quick disclaimer: this is something that we run off our own backs. This isn't affiliated with any of the companies that we work for. We've got Martyn joining us this evening as well from Virgin Atlantic, and these views or expressions or whatever are just not affiliated with any of our employers. They're just personal. Let's kick off with the diversity charter. So Jack, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, our diversity charter. So if you've been to one of our user groups before, or you haven't, our user group is absolutely open to everybody that joins. So no matter of your age, race, color, ethnicity, whatever, you are all welcome to our user group, whether that's in person or remotely. So if at any time you feel like there's a message in the chat or there's something that happens and you're not quite okay with that, please feel free to reach out to us either via Twitter in a direct message or email either of us on our email addresses, and we'll happily pick that up and sort that out for you.
Awesome. So just a quick bit of background on the group if this is the first time joining us. So this is the 12th event that we've run. Jack and I put this together just over a year ago now. And yeah, it's this is the third or fourth webinar that we've run. Third one? Fourth one?
Fourth? Fourth, yeah, one of those.
I'm going to go with fourth. So who are we? So Jack and I used to work together at Microsoft Partner, both in architecture for technical design for cloud workloads, so both Office 365 and Azure. We've attended a bunch of user groups before, and we kind of realised they're quite London-centric. They're typically in the capital. We both live on the south coast, and we kind of thought, why don't we start one of these up and try and give something back to the community for all of the kind of fellow Azure users. And that's pretty much what we did. We got some space in a venue that we typically meet at called the Skiff in Brighton, right near the station, and things kind of went from there. So future sessions and plans for the group. So we try to keep the session content as varied as possible. Jack and I come from an infrastructure background, but obviously we've got a lot of devs and people from all kind of walks of life, whether it's in management or you're a network guy or whatever. You're all welcome, and we try to make the content as varied as possible. Tonight's agenda. So we've got joining us tonight, Martyn from Virgin Atlantic. Welcome and thanks, Martyn, for joining us. Martyn's going to talk about security in DevOps or DevSecOps and how he's applied that in the role that he's been doing at Virgin Atlantic. So yeah, Jack, unless you've got anything to add.
No, absolutely. Let's get cracking, and we'll open up conversation afterwards. I think one really important thing, and I think Martyn will agree with this. At any time you've got any questions or you want to ask things, feel free to use the chat. Me and Ryan will keep an eye on the chat and pitch into Martyn where appropriate. And also, if you want to come off mute and turn your webcam on and ask those questions, then absolutely feel free to, and we can have those discussions. So if that's all right with you, Martyn, I think that applies.
Yeah, it's perfect. Cheers.
Fantastic. All right, well, with that, then over to you, Martyn. Take it away.
All right, perfect. Can we see the deck to start with, first of all? Most important point.
We can indeed.
Excellent. Right, so yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for the invite as well, most of all. So as most of you can probably tell from the rather distinct accent, I am certainly not from the South Coast. But I do work for Virgin Atlantic, who are obviously in Crawley. So usually you will find me down in Crawley most weeks and working at home a few days. But yeah, what I want to talk about in this session really is just we're quite heavy into DevOps in a big way, and here as a platform, and obviously security is a big part of that for fairly obvious reasons. We're an industry that is targeted a lot more than you would think, actually, in terms of attempts to get into our perimeter. Our InfoSec team and our network team do a fantastic job every single day regardless of what else is happening, to make sure that personal data that we hold, flight plans, any of that data that could be used for a nefarious purpose is effectively kept secure and away from prying eyes and doesn't fall into the wrong hands. But DevSecOps specifically is something which I think is getting quite a lot of airtime, and it's quite odd, really, that I think the notion is, because security should just be something that we do as part of our everyday lives in technology. Really, it's pretty much instilled into everyone now, I think. So I want to talk a little bit about, why it's important. And I've got some survey results in here to go through, and some results from some hacking attempts that were successful, just to go through, why is it important and what we're actually trying to defend. Rather than dive straight into what we do and how we do it, I first want to go into a bit about the theory as to why we do what we do. And I think that's important for everyone to understand. So you get an idea of why we have set up the tool in the way we have. And then finally, I just want to go into a little bit of detail about some of the tooling that we use, specifically against our retail platform, to make sure that everything stays nice and secure. So we'll crack on. Nice little photo of our upper class bar on our A350. It's called the Loft, if anyone ever gets the pleasure of flying upper class with us at any point in the probably distant future now. This is effectively where you can now sit and enjoy a drink without having to go back to your seat if the seatbelt sign comes on. The eagle-eyed ones among you will notice there that there is some seatbelts there, so that's a new concept that's quite interesting to share with people. So just a real quick bit about me before we really get into the weeds and the details of this, really. So as the guys were saying, I'm the DevOps Technical Lead for Virgin Atlantic. Basically, that means that anything to do with DevOps, be it not so much people, but certainly process technology and very much culture, very much comes directly under me, and I work with our delivery partners at Virgin Atlantic. Lots of the projects that are using the platform and working to agile working methodologies to make sure that the delivery function and the delivery of what they're developing is as smooth as possible. I previously, before Virgin Atlantic, used to work as a director of engineering, also for a Microsoft partner. I've actually been working with Azure since way back in 2008, when it was first announced as a product, I guess, when it was called Project Aviva, which was Microsoft's internal code name for it. A long time ago, in my System Center days, I wrote a book on System Center Configuration Manager. I also blog quite a bit as well, and do a lot of community speaking and speaking at conferences and events as well. And more recently, in the past few weeks, I've started up a podcast called DevOps Squared, which you can find on all good podcast outlets, where I interview people about various different topics in the DevOps space, and go through some discussion points and answer any questions that come in from any listeners. So if you're interested in DevOps generally, then that is my very shameless plug for one of my little ventures that I'm working on at the minute. Okay, so as we discussed, just really quickly, what are we going to go through? So why is security so important? The theory of how we're actually doing this internally, and then how are we actually doing it? So what tools are we using? How do we put them together? And why have we chose to do that? Ultimately, what benefits do we get from it? Okay, so reality of data breaches, first of all. So this is using a well-known data set which you can go off and download and interrogate yourselves. There's a link at the end of this little section to that data set that you'll be able to go and look at this for yourself. And basically, the first slide is just going through on the left how many records per year have been lost. And you can see in 2018, that was up to 13 million. is the scale on the side there. And in 2019, it did go down a bit to 6 million. But you can generally see that since 2010, the trend has been upwards. So more and more records are basically being lost year upon year. And then we look at the breaches by sensitivity as well, which is an interesting thing to look at. So what you can see here is, again, since 2010, the types of data that was stolen in those records. So whether it was just email data, social security, credit card, health information, or what we call a full record, which is basically anything anyone would need to ultimately go steal your identity. And it's really interesting, I think, this data as you start to go on, is you can see that more and more email is basically the target of what's been stolen, and less people seem to be interested in our health records, other than in 2017 where 15 million health records went missing. That was actually down to one breach alone. These numbers can be skewed quite significantly by individual data points. But you can see, generally speaking, again, the trend is that that not as sensitive information is being stolen, but it helps to go to then get into other things. Obviously, your email address on the internet is part of your identity. You use it to get into many, many things. And unfortunately, a lot of people use the same password to also get into many things. So it's a bit like having the keys to the castle in a lot of cases, unfortunately. So breaches by sector. So what this slide is basically showing us. So first of all, on the left is the percentage of breaches per sector. Now, transport more generally, or aviation specifically, are never really that high. But fundamentally, where you think that the front end of the business, obviously, we have a website where you can transact through there, you can manage bookings through there, you can sign up for our flying club if you're a frequent flyer. That's all personal info that we hold potentially on your booking. So we are a target for that. Data is the new propaganda machine, effectively, and we've seen very recently with various elections around the world that's a big focus area for a lot of hackers, is spreading disinformation, and they need data to make that happen and make that effective. But one of the things that's probably not a surprise on this, it certainly wasn't to me, is that tech companies account for 44% of all of the breaches over this time period since 2010. And web companies, so where we're saying web companies, we're basically meaning organizations which provide SaaS services. Then on the right-hand side is an analysis by the attack method, which is really, really interesting. And I presented this same slide at Cloud Expo in March, so just a couple of months ago. And I actually can't remember the name of the company, thankfully. But there was a company there that had a stand-up that said, I think it was insider jobs account for 60% of all data breaches. Use our software to protect against insider attacks on your network. And I'd not presented my session yet, but I was walking around and I thought, that's pretty interesting, because my data from publicly available source tells me the complete opposite. And actually, you are just generally hacked by someone from an outside world, rather than it being an insider job, and they only account for 6%. Another thing I found quite interesting as well is that lost devices only account for 13%. So you hear quite a lot about people leaving laptops and devices on trains, or airports and stuff like that, and things being stolen. But only 13% of those records were stolen due to a lost device. So quite a small number. Plus, that might also indicate as well that organizations are getting a lot smarter about where sensitive data is stored, and more people are using more cloud-based technology to make sure that that data stays where it should be, rather than spilling over into a local environment. So then just finally, the number of records of lost by method. So again, it's pretty interesting to see that even though hacking accounts for the majority, it was 62% of the breaches that are in this data set. Only just over 8 million records were actually lost attributed to that. And although post-security accounts for 13%, it's actually accounting for just over 17 million records that were lost. So there's quite conflicting data in there. So just as a real quick summary, in the links in the bottom, and I'll be sending the slides to the guys afterwards to distribute out. So generally, we know it's going up. 62% of those breaches are due to hacking. Only 6% are due to mistakes, and another 6% to insider jobs. So although hacking accounts for nearly 2/3 of those breaches, half the number of records are stolen compared to post-security, and that's quite a polar flip on what's actually happening. So tech firms are most at risk, accounting for 44% of breaches, and 70% of passwords used are in breaches that were charted in that data set. And it's a really interesting stat. And there's a good link further on the data source there that talks about some analysis Microsoft did with machine learning for Office 365 accounts and Microsoft Online accounts, where they actually found a really high percentage. I can't remember the exact percentage, but a really high percentage accounted for the passwords that were used by people with Microsoft accounts, and they use that intelligence and they use that registry of data to force people to change their passwords to keep their accounts safe. And there was a number of those accounts that were also global admins on Azure accounts, Office 365 accounts. So that potentially saved, a really bad situation for a lot of the organizations involved. So when it comes to security generally, what actually hinders security innovation? So if you think, I don't know if anyone on the call is in an InfoSec role or is in a role that works with an InfoSec team, but some of these things will definitely ring true to you, I think, in terms of what you probably experienced at your organization or previous organizations. So there's actually a really long list of stuff on here. I just picked out the top ones that I know will ring true to people. So manual process and poor culture is the first one. The fact that security is a point-in-time assessment. So you run an audit, great, you're compliant on the 5th of March of 2020 at 6 o'clock. That's absolutely great. But what about 10 minutes before then? What about an hour after then? Was someone in your environment then? Everyone will know this one. So the traditional friction with InfoSec. I'm really lucky at Virgin that the InfoSec team there are absolutely brilliant. They're completely on board with the DevOps methodology and understanding that we need to move to that method of working to evolve the business and evolve what we do as a technology organization. But I know full well from other experiences that is certainly not the overriding message, in that a lot of teams end up getting a lot of friction with their InfoSec teams. A lot of InfoSec professionals have traditionally been more seen as know people who are not willing to change the way stuff's done. And that's not down to them. It's also down to us infrastructure guys and developers understanding why they are saying what they're doing. And that's where the friction has started to come along. Misunderstanding the context, a really big one as well. Political internal interference, everyone knows this one as well. So a manager of so-and-so team sticks their head above the parapet and says, no, we're not doing this because of this. They get overruled by someone from another team because of something else. Potentially a big deal going down with a client. It's just not good business ultimately, but it does happen. Fear of failure is a big thing as well, especially when it comes to security. People don't want to fail when it comes to security. You don't want to be on the front page of the news the next day because your organization has suffered a data breach. And then finally on here, lack of external thinking. And what we're basically saying by lack of external thinking is ultimately, as organizations evolve and technologies evolve, quite often what happens without the right people mindset and without that growth mindset that you attribute with DevOps, fundamentally what ends up happening is that you get so insular to your organization, you end up forgetting external context. and you lose track of what's happening in the industry because you're so focused about what's happening in your day-to-day at whatever organization it is you work at. So it's really important to make sure that you either find a way to make sure that you have that external thinking and external understanding, or make sure that you bring in people from external organizations that are qualified to talk about it with you. Okay, so the theory of how is an interesting one. Now, the key message here is that numbers matter. So if you take the 100 number that's there, that basically identifies our ops team. So we have 100 people in ops. We have 10 people who are developers, and then we have that one security person who is really, really good at their job. However, that is one person. What we need to be doing is making sure that there's 111 people there that are able to spot security anomalies. And that's where security training comes in for people in your organization, giving them the ability to make sure that they can identify anomalies and feel confident in reporting those anomalies to the team, that can look in the right place with the expertise and look at the right metrics, look at the right logs, look at the right data points, and make sure that they understand what's happening and who's affected. So that's why when everyone talks about security being everyone's responsibility, this is fundamentally what we mean. We're basically asking people to help us out, really, and make our InfoSec team, infinitely times bigger by making sure that other people can join us and help us identify those issues. And when it comes to a development world, no better person to do that from a development perspective than the people that are writing the code and the people that understand the code. InfoSec professionals are rarely developers, rarely have knowledge of the development stack, but developers do. And having them with the InfoSec skills to be able to help that really works. One of the things we do at Virgin within our Scrum teams is we identify security champions, and that one person from that team is responsible for liaising with the InfoSec team, raising things with them, dealing with any issues that come back from InfoSec and taking it back to the team. And it really helps have an open dialogue with both of those teams effectively. And we've seen quite a good take up on that between the teams, and really good dialogue between both of those groups of people, where traditionally there may be friction and there may be things that would not be done because it's difficult to make sure that those kind of things get done. So basically, fundamentally, what we're saying here is the more people we can have, the more equipped we will be as an organization to identify those anomalies, no matter how small, no matter what is wrong, no matter what you know your system. If you see something that's wrong and you think that's down to security, you need the ability to be able to speak up. So the art of DevSecOps. Now, I actually don't really like the term DevSecOps. I kind of just think it's, sec should just be something we're doing anyway. One of the things I think that is good about it, though, is that it highlights the need to make sure that we don't forget about it. What can happen with DevOps especially, and I have seen this at organizations before, and this doesn't happen at Virgin, but I have seen it before, is organizations get so fixated on the you build it, you run it mentality that they actually forget about the basics and the fundamentals, like architecture, like security. Those principles and those underlying pillars of your organization still have to be followed with DevOps. DevOps is just there to take away the pain points when it comes from development through to delivery and operations. That's what it's there to solve. It's not there to solve security challenges. It's not there to solve architecture challenges. Those things are still the same. So what can go into a DevSecOps team? So you see the purple pillars under there. So those are really the four key areas, I think, that I always identify being real game changers when it comes to making sure that you understand what's happening in your environment and who can actually fix it. What is that one tangible thing that means that I don't get hacked? So from left to right, security engineering, who are responsible for the experimentation, automation, and testing. So they are basically taking data from the other teams, and they are making sure that we can detect in the future exactly what is happening. They can automate that attack so that we can simulate it and we know when it's happening, and they can run tests. So just like any other good development practice, we test, to steal a government phrase from quite recently. Security operations, obviously this is our SOC. These are the people that hunt, detect, and contain. These are effectively the people that find stuff that's happening, spot stuff is happening, and make sure that the threat is contained within a specific application or part of the network, and that it doesn't bleed out into any other areas. Compliance operations. So generally not a technical team. At Virgin, they are not. These may be our legal teams that are responsible for dealing with all of our compliance. It may be our privacy team that are responsible for everyone's GDPR training, all of those kind of things. But those are the people that have the ability to respond, manage that on technology's behalf, so technology can focus on fixing the issue and making sure that it doesn't happen again after the fact, and also training people. Key thing with GDPR and a lot of the other security audits and security certifications out there is you have to prove when audited that people have gone through mandatory security training, that they understand what to do in the event that they believe there's been a data breach or an attack on the network that's been successful. And then the last one is security science, and this is where we can get data teams involved. This is where we learn, we measure, and we forecast. What do we mean by that? After every incident, I'm sure many people in your own organizations do this. After every critical incident, you have a major incident review. This is effectively what this is from a security perspective. We pump all of the learnings from that incident with the key people into the right room. We make sure that we learn from that. We make sure that we have an ability to measure it. If we're fixing anything, we need to be able to measure that that has been a success. And we need to be able to forecast it as well. So we need to be able to know if this happens again, this is our exposure. If this is successful, this is our exposure. If we block it, or if there are repeated attempts to this, what do we need to do? You know, what's going to happen in the future? And that's really where that comes in. And those four functions together, you know, not always separate teams. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen them all as separate teams. Generally within a mix of teams are what makes up the SEC in DevSecOps. Okay, so, you know, think about security from a real fundamental perspective for a little bit. Because I think, like architecture, so I've been an architect, it's really easy to, I guess, take all of this for granted. And even that, you know, this is someone else's job. It's nothing to do with me. Someone else will bring it up. But if there's 5 things that I think would be really good for everyone to take away from tonight, I think it's these 5 things. And I think these are really key things that you need to think about when you think about designing security into your solutions or your products. And don't forget, I don't want to keep coming back to GDPR, but GDPR is a real fundamental thing now where you have to prove security by design if you're ever audited. So encryption, authentication, logging, asset management, zoning, and containment. So these are all 5 things that I think are real pillars of fundamental good security within any organization. So just from the top to go through them in a bit more detail, making sure you have encryption, always have encryption. There is the processing power available today. You should never be hearing the excuse, but it adds an overhead that just doesn't exist anymore. Authentication, you know, authenticate by default, even if it lets everyone within your organization in because it's a global tool, great, but don't ship anything without any method of authentication. There are always bad actors trying to attack your software, especially if it's public facing, not so much if it's internal. But what happens if those attackers get into your network? You then have no authentication at all. What happens in that scenario? Always make sure you have some form of authentication. And I would actually extend that as well by saying authentication and authorization. So making sure you are a valid account that is logged in, and then making sure that valid account actually has access to do what you want it to do. Login, really critical part of what we were just talking about, being able to revisit the incident, detect the incident, find out exactly what's happening. Logging is really key. if you don't log anything, you cannot revisit this and find out what happens. You are effectively, to use a phrase, flying by the seat of your pants. You will have no idea what's happened, what they've stolen, what they've not stolen, how long they've been there, how many times they have successfully been in before. From a physical perspective, asset management. Asset management goes back to ITIL in a lot of ways, but it's fundamental, right? Make sure you know where your assets are. And this is just from a real basic, if someone steals one of your devices or you lose a device, you don't want to be sending out emails to a department saying, does anyone know whose laptop this is that I found in reception? I found this mobile device in the canteen. Does anyone know whose it is? It's got a picture of so-and-so and a dog on the front of it. And, you don't want that information. You don't want that scenario. It's quite embarrassing. You want to be able to just know who that device belongs to so you can deal with it appropriately. And then lastly, zoning and containment. So absolutely, technology like Azure makes it very easy for us to have single topologies up there. But obviously, as any good architect will tell you, there is still a method of segregation that needs to be done between production and non-production environments. So that's all we mean by zoning and containment. Make sure that we zone them off into production and non-production, and also make sure that we have the ability to contain those environments as well. So make sure there is a way to effectively not bleed any of that data out into the wild. That's a really critical thing, and it's really important that that's something that you adopt and think about. Okay, so one of the things that's really fundamental is security as code. So if you think about a lot of security policies in a lot of organizations, they're generally paper-based. One of the things that's obviously tricky with paper is it's a point-in-time thing. It's a point-in-time document. And one of the problems you have with cloud is that is evolutionary in terms of how quickly it moves. We're not talking about glacial improvements to our environments. We're talking about very quickly deploying new features, introducing new tools, introducing new platforms to make sure that we do a great job to deliver the customer service that Virgin Atlantic's known for. Having paper-based policies that don't keep up with that is actually pointless. So actually what you need to be doing is defining policy as code, or security as code, everything as code, whichever way you want to look at it. So everything should be defined programmatically. It's easy to change, it's easy to track, it's easy to look at who changed it, hopefully why they changed it, and it's easy to see how it was instantiated to push out that new version. So, you can extend this. You think about your data center. So going back a little bit to when everyone worked in data centers, what do? You lock your doors all the time, you make people badge in, and you make sure that people that can badge in are authorized personnel only, and you have background checks. Let's translate that into the cloud. What happens in the cloud? You force people to use strong passwords, you make them use multi-factor authentication, you rotate your API credentials, and you manage your cross-account access. And a number of other things. Those are just the top 4 things that you could put in. Define all of those as code. They will apply to the right environment. This is stealing an infrastructure as code principle, really, where we talk about that defining everything, and whatever execution venue it ends up being executed on, it does what it needs to. Exactly the same with this kind of stuff. Don't think of something being targeted to one specific place. So you need to make sure that you think about all of those things and make sure that you can think of a way to define those as code, especially in the cloud, because then you can keep up with the evolution of the platform that your users and your customers are demanding without having to be reactive. That's really fundamentally what this is all about. So much of security ends up being applied after the fact. That this really enables you to have a front foot when it comes to security. Okay, so how do we make ourselves better? Right? And this is a fundamental thing, really, that I think you have to understand and you have to get right to do a good job of this. It's no good putting all the effort in we've just talked about to then not be able to evolve. So it's quite a complicated diagram, but it's actually quite simple to explain. So on the right-hand side, we're basically getting to the point of high fidelity feedback, something fundamentally tangible that I can go back and specifically fix. And that's really important when it comes to security, and I'll come on to why in a minute. So attack activity, community, all of that information forms ultimately intelligence that we feed back into our security team. Throughout each point of our CI/CD process, including regression testing, our monitoring tools, our unit tests, and our customer feedback as well, not forgetting that. We have the ability to harness all of that feedback, feed that into security intelligence. What attack vectors are people using to attack us? Let's focus on something that's really tangible. Let's not spend all of our security budget on something that we frankly have no control over. Good example of this is DDoS attacks. Right? Every organization I've ever worked for, every client I've ever visited, when I worked at a partner, they all get attacked. Sometimes hundreds of thousands of times, even millions of times a day. Make sure that the edge devices are able to detect that and stop them. Don't try and, don't design systems that put effort into finding out where it's come from and why. Take it as a given that it's going to happen and focus your efforts somewhere else. Because quite often a denial of service attack, much like in the real world, criminals use diversionary tactics to move you away from somewhere to somewhere else. DDoS is exactly the same. Cyber criminals use DDoS to focus your security team's effort in one place while they exploit a vulnerability somewhere else and get into your network. That is why it's so critical to make sure that you focus on the things that really apply to your organization, and you get that via feedback. So ultimately, everything ends up going to the left, and it goes to our security team to be ingested, and ultimately our product team, and they work together to make sure that they have something tangible to go fix what it is that someone's found. But that can be, depending on your products or organization, depending on your exposure to the outside world, that could be hundreds, thousands, millions, or billions of records every single day. So how do we ultimately get to high fidelity feedback? So if you look on the left here, there's a number of boxes that basically determine where we get security intelligence from. So outside, researchers, inside, so red team is there might be an ops team in operations. They're a team that are basically responsible for looking at security events, penetration testers, our tooling, threat intelligence, AI, logs events, bug bounty schemes. All of that information can generate as terabytes of logs a day and terabytes of data a day. But we can't just put that direct to our developers because nothing will get done. And if you think about the fundamentals of DevOps, one of those is agile working and Scrum, and we talk about prioritization. If you give them a massive bulk of work where they can't see the wood for the trees, they just know it's all security related, I can guarantee it's not going to get done. And it won't get done because they don't understand the importance. They don't understand why this is an important thing to fix. Whereas if you take a journey across from the left-hand side, you start running correlation and case management through workflows, through pipelines, and start automating some of the tasks. Remember some of the teams we were talking about earlier on? If you start automating some of these tasks in workflows and start putting them into pipelines as part of your release and build processes, you can start reducing the number of events that come down for, ultimately to the millions, the thousands, the hundreds, and hopefully the tens as well. And by the time we get to the tens, that's when we put them onto the developer's backlog as really actionable things, features or defects that we can say, look, Mr. Developer, we have this information come through. We can see that someone's tried to exploit it 60 times in the past 2 days. This is something absolutely priority one you need to fix in this sprint. You need to drop something else and you need to fix it. That is something really tangible that your developers can go off and fix. so they are not looking at other pieces of data that are potentially not relevant. And this one underlying thing that means that your organization is going to be front page unless it's fixed. That is what high fidelity feedback is. It is making sure that the things that matter to your organization are fixed as quickly as possible. Another way to put it would be, being able to see the wood from the trees. This is making sure that in a forest of events, that one tree stands out, that is the one tree that will make your products or your solution, your offering more secure than it was before. So that is a really important thing to take away. So I just wanted to include a little bit information. So this is actually from our pipelines. So I got this a couple of months ago when I was preparing for Cloud Expo. And as you can see at the top, it's a little bit of a fact check. So it's great to go through all this information, but does it actually work? And that's really the key message here. So where we have teams that focus on testing, detection, measuring progress, we have 30% fewer defects in production than those that are still on this journey of coming into this whole process and ethos. 30% is quite a big number. And 30% fewer defects in production means more time working on new features and new functionality and less time fixing technical debt. Okay, our mean time to resolution is 5 times faster than other teams. Why is that? Few reasons. They fundamentally understand exactly what is going on in their application is one. The tooling they're using and the telemetry they're getting through things like App Insights means that they know line by line of code exactly what is happening when one thing is executed by a specific action, and they know exactly what issue is being caused because of that telemetry, so they can focus in and hone in really quickly on where it is. Okay, for those teams as well, an average of 98% CI/CD success. So this is a combination, and we have some CI/CD processes, workflows, and pipelines, whatever you want to call them, that run for hours. We speak to some core systems on-prem, so we don't just run cloud agents, we run on-prem agents for our builds and releases as well. So over all of those agents in those teams that work in this methodology and have taken these principles on board through their security champions, working with the InfoSec team, and using some of the tooling that we've put in place, I'll come on to in a second. We see a 98% success rate of those deployments, and that is really high and something that we want to keep. But using the feedback process I've just described and the ethos of DevOps, DevOps is never done. You should always be learning. You should always be getting feedback on your tooling, your processes, and making them better. DevOps is not a project that you finish at a specific point in time. It is something that is continuously evolving as your business does. So I personally want to try and close that 2% gap. It's something I think we can do over time. There's obviously a bit of work to do, but it's something that we can focus in on, and it's a point of improvement that will make us a lot leaner. It will make us even more agile, and it will make us even more loved by the business units that we deal with, because we will be shipping high quality releases every single time. Okay, so 5 foundations, I think, and this is a thing that I like to share at the end of security talks. So when I'm doing things internally, these are the same 5 things that I try to preach into teams to really, get a hold of what's happening. So firstly, don't measure at a team level, measure globally. Measuring locally is great when you talk about DevOps metrics, but when you talk about security metrics, security's goal, as it says there, is to help the business achieve business goals, avoid silo thinking. So if we're measuring security at a team level, that's great. We have 4 teams here that have really high security metrics. But actually, what we're hiding underneath there is that these 2 teams that are actually more business critical and more public facing have terrible security scores. So always make sure that you measure that stuff globally. Measuring outcomes versus outputs. So measuring work is not tied to tangible outcomes. but making sure that you actually measure the result of that is something that is more tangible, and it's something that will give you a lot better quality feedback back into what you're doing, and making sure that you have the ability to constantly improve and make sure that you're doing everything possible to eradicate some of those errors and eradicate some of those issues in your processes and obviously your tooling. Maturity thresholds. So quite a lot of people talk about DevOps maturity. We actually do maturity scoring internally as well, and we do have a section in there about security. However, we don't focus in on it. Maturity, great. If you're a mature DevOps organization, perfect. Congratulations, well done. But you need to make sure that you're prioritizing resilience over maturity. You could be the most mature team in the world when it comes to your processes and your tooling, but quite frankly, you may ship really shoddy code that is a hacker's paradise. And those are the kind of flips that you need to think about when you're thinking about maturity. So again, don't miss the forest for the trees. So focusing in on components too much can mean missing the bigger picture. It's really easy with DevOps to think really modular, because we're taught when we're doing DevOps to think in a really modular way, and we're taught to really go back to principles and think, right, if I make this change here, what does it affect? And that is where our testing comes in. It's where our regression testing comes in. Components are important, but make sure that you think about those components you're working on in a bigger picture. Don't make sure that you don't focus in too much that you forget what the bigger picture is. This is a really contentious one, but I find it a good thing. Don't try to measure failure. So failure is inevitable in every organization. And what is the one principle of DevOps? We succeed as a team or we fail as a team. So incentivizing failure avoidance is completely unrealistic. It's actually a bad practice to start giving people, because if you start incentivizing the avoidance of failure, when those failures do occur, you want complete honesty and complete transparency. And incentivizing the avoidance of that failure is not a way to do it. It's also completely unrealistic. Failures will happen. Technology will fail. Think about other measurements to measure specific levels of uptime or performance, but don't measure failure specifically. Don't come up with a metric that says, we want to be able to pass X number of security scans in a month, because that's just not within your control for the most part. Okay, so the real meat on the bones now. So lots of why we do it. Lots of people are stealing lots of sensitive data, and that data can be used to, quite frankly, make people's lives a misery if it falls into the right hands. You now have some idea of how we go through the motions and how we think about security. So how actually doing, the honest answer here, really, and I know some people may probably think this is hard to believe, but there is no secret sauce when it comes to this. Our secret sauce is the platform. We do not use anything that you cannot consume as a regular user of Azure. Our core tools are all out of the box. Azure policy, really fundamental to us, and something that we obviously hold really dear, and I'll come on to that in a minute. Azure DevOps for our repositories and our pipelines. Security Center, we use the free tier, we don't use the paid tier. But the free tier gives us so much intelligence as to what's happening at a platform level. The secure DevOps kit for Azure, being able to load that tool up and scan your subscriptions and scan resources against that baseline and report on it is absolutely priceless. Running a lot of these things in an automated way comes through Azure Functions. And then just to reiterate the point, policy literally underpins everything we do. And there's that temp policy as code coming into it as well. So I want to talk a little bit now as start to wind this up. What does this achieve? All of this stuff's great, but what benefits do we actually get from this? So the first thing is around a single source of truth. So in order to apply and evaluate policy compliance consistently, remember we talked about being able to measure a point in time versus consistently being able to check that we are in compliance with our policies. Those policy definitions need to be maintained in a repository, version control system, whatever you want to call it, and that is where Azure DevOps' repositories function comes in for us. It also provides a means for us to enforce and audit who has changed what. So now those version control policies are in a single source of truth for teams and individuals accessing and modifying those policies. They are organized in a way that gives clarity and consistency. So one such way to do it is to give each policy its own folder with parameter values for the different stages of a deployment. So you think dev, QA, prod from an environment level. Environment-specific parameters, it's not to create snowflakes, but to handle real subtle differences in the value we pass for defining compliance. Not all environments are treated like prod from a compliance point of view, but for instance, the networks allowed into a production resource are different to the ones that a dev resource can access. So those real subtle differences need a way to be able to manage them, and parameterization of those files per environment is a way to do that. Alternatively, you can use metadata alongside the policy definition to have fine-grained control on the creation of that policy or the assignment process. Next point, integrating policy compliance in the pipeline. So I don't know if anyone uses Azure DevOps here, but in Azure DevOps pipelines, you have the ability to deploy an Azure policy through there. So you can basically use your pipeline to create and assign those Azure policies alongside your application code. You can pick up existing templates that give an example of how to use simple PowerShell commands to create and assign policies quickly. They ship with a product out of the box, so you can go in and you can add that task into your pipeline, and it will build up the template for you, and it will tell you exactly what it's doing. We use that as a base. Again, nothing fancy. We use as much as we can out of the box. We very much, and I very much take the 80-20 rule when it comes to stuff like this, is if a tool can give me 80% of what I need it to, versus a tool that I could completely customize myself and breaks on every upgrade, I will take the 80% every time, and I will find another way to make things work. This is exactly where you need to be going when it comes to SaaS tooling. So the template that you deploy in that case has two tasks, one to create and one to assign the policies for whatever scope that is, so be it management group, resource group, and you can modify the PowerShell in there to handle multiple scripts at once if you need to. Next thing, bringing everything together. So policies evolve over time, as do the environments and our organization's needs. So if policies are changing and validated only in production, it's already too late really for the application team to do anything but try and roll back when there's a compliance violation. And this is also where shift left comes in. So making sure that policy evaluation is part of the DevOps process right from the start and not a retrofit is a really important part of DevSecOps fundamentally to begin with. If you think about how this works, so we actually split out, so segregation of policies is a real a key thing there. So we basically make sure that we have our application code in one repository, our policies in another one, and the pipelines go to those repositories and retrieve the latest versions when they need them. It means that our application layer and our policy layer is split up by a repository. It means that only people who need to have access to it, but everyone can consume the hard work that people have put in to be able to manage that platform. So fundamentally, at the start of that process, when we pick up those latest policies and apply them to those environments, between the environment deployments, we add explicit controls to check the latest policies are being adhered to. And you can do this using gates. So within Azure DevOps' pipelines function, you can add a pre-deployment gate in to check policy compliance. And it will basically run a scan to make sure that those policies that you are applied to have been adhered to. Well, that's a really key part something that's really important to make sure that you do this from the outset. Again, this is all about making sure that your security is inherent by design and is not an afterthought. Key thing, really key thing on here, I think, is the last point, so nipping those policy violations in the bud. So policy violations, fundamentally, they happen in two scenarios, broadly speaking. So new policy is applied on an existing resource. In this case, the resources are deployed, but they don't adhere to the new policy. That's something that will most commonly happen. Or the new deployment request violates an existing policy, so basically flipping it on its back there. In both of those scenarios, we want to catch that violation as early in the release cycle as possible. So to achieve that, we assign the fetch policies in the pipeline stage before any deployment. So to prevent those policy violations at deployment time, and then enable the gates that I was just talking about between the pipeline stages. And our stages are our environment. So we have a stage for dev, a stage for QA, and a stage for production. Those stages and those pre-deployment and post-deployment checks and those gates basically handle any policy violations that exist on the environment and any violations that are not captured during deployment time. So if we were talking about a VM, for instance, it might be an ingest configuration change. If we're talking about an Azure SQL database, it may be the firewall has been modified as part of the deployment, and that is now no longer in scope. So we're always checking all the time. So not just at deployment time, not just periodically with scans, but we're also going through and making sure that we do a number of different things to make sure that policies are adhered to. One of the other things I want to touch on as well that's actually not on the slides is as part of the secure DevOps kit for Azure, there are some tools in there that enable us to scan our code for a number of different security things. So we scan our code using SonarQube. So just the tool we happen to pick, the cloud version, is very good. And that will create, if it fails and finds stuff that it doesn't like, it will fail the build process before we've even got close to any deployment, and it will go back to the developers to fix. We can also scan our code using the security kit for Azure. We can also scan our code for credentials and hard-coded IPs and host names where people are not using config files. So we can basically mandate with that people use Key Vault to store all their secrets, and the code retrieves the secret from the vault at all times. So we can check all of that stuff. And then finally, one of the things that we've not done yet, but is most certainly on the roadmap, is wherever it's a web-based deployment, we run an automated OWASP top 10 vulnerability scan against that resource, so that after the deployment is complete, we run a full scan, we get a set of results back that can be interrogated and make sure that that code is safe to deploy. And we can interrogate that automatically as well and look for a specific failure level. Tie that in with all of the work that developers normally do about unit tests from a functionality point of view, our test team do, from a rollback test perspective, a regression test perspective. It means that you have that high level of success for your deployments that I was talking about in the fact check slides. And it also means that when you release, you're releasing with confidence that the code that is out there has been scanned to the best of a machine's ability. It's nothing that's done by human, and we know that the code that is out there is as secure as possible, and thus our network, our perimeter, and our customers' data is ultimately as secure as it can be as well. So with that, I just want to say thank you for listening. I talked quite a lot in there, but I understand you'll be getting the slides if you want to look at any of this afterwards as well. I don't know if we have any questions that have come through.
Yeah, firstly, thank you, Martyn. That was awesome. Like, I got a few things from there, and I'll re-emphasize your point: policy as code, and policy is everything. So yeah, absolutely. We have got one question. I don't know if whether Sandy wants to come off mute and ask that herself, but you know, feel free if you want to. If not, we'll happily read that out. Okay. I'll read out in that case. So we've got a question from Sandy saying, how do you conduct the OOPS tests? Is there a tool in Azure that you can recommend?
Well, so it's not an Azure tool, but we use ZAP. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with ZAP, the OWASP Z attack proxy, ZAP, Zulu Alpha Papa. You can integrate that tool into your pipelines to be able to run the actual scans for you and retrieve the results back and interrogate those. You can do that quite easily. There are a number of blog posts on how to do that, because being open and honest, that's exactly how I learned how to do it. I think there's a really good post from a Premier Field Engineer, developer, PFE, that has a really good write-up on how to do that. So yeah, there are tools available. ZAP is obviously free, but it is very, very good. It's industry known to use. So I would definitely recommend using that tool. And in all honesty, it probably took about an hour to integrate it into our pipelines and get a basic scan running. So very, very much worth the effort, in short.
Yeah, definitely. We've also got another question saying there are a few mentions around security by design. Have you got any documents or links to read about the concept and how you've learned it?
Yeah, so I think the best one that I've actually found is so there's a I think it's securedbydesign.com actually. I think it might be as simple as that. But the best one to use is actually from the NCSC, which is the National Cybersecurity Center. So they're part of GCHQ. So they publish the secure design principles for cloud. So I actually have a link that I can put into the chat for that. I'll do that now actually. See if you're wanting to find it. So yeah, if you go onto that address there, they are basically the people that will fundamentally issue the guidance and the principles that you need to make sure that your system is secure. And they talk about system design, physical and programmatically as well. So excellent resource in general, actually. The NCSC website has a lot of stuff like this on that you can use. They have a cloud services one as well, tangenting a little bit, but if you're into Office 365, they have one for Office 365, one for Windows, one for Windows Server. They have all kinds of stuff up there. So if you want to work in a high secure, low functional environment, then they have all of the documents of what to turn on and off.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I've certainly been in there a few times, and I seem to be getting more and more aligned to sort of NIST functionality, which is very similar, but obviously a little bit more different controls and how they handle that. So yeah, there's a lot of great resources out there, and a good job. A lot of them are free nowadays as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I forget the name of the organization, but there's a Windows security baseline. Let's see if I can find it. I can't remember what they are. CIS baseline. So not forgetting the CIS as well. So they obviously publish a lot of stuff as well. So if you're still using Windows VMs or Linux VMs for your stuff, the CIS benchmarks for security have a lot of stuff around how to deploy your operating systems secured by design as well. So that if you're into Windows, they talk about group policy templates and having the group policy templates to be able to deploy Windows at different levels of security. So that's the CIS, the Center for Internet Security. So cisecurity.org is their website. To be able to get that, you do have to sign up for that, and it's not free. But if you're in an organization that mandates high security, then they do have hardened images as well, which you can deploy in Azure as well.
Yeah, they're available in the public marketplace in Azure. Yeah. So yeah, they're really handy to use. So if you need to get to sort of CIS level 1 or CIS level 2, there are Windows Server images and certain variants of Linux images that are already pre-hardened for you that you can deploy straight from the Azure Marketplace, which is awesome. Also, Security Center is a Security Center standard. You can apply a policy from there that will obviously automatically scan your Azure resources to say whether you're compliant with the Azure CIS framework. That's recently been updated to 1.1.0, I think, as well. So that's been recently updated to the latest version of the CIS framework, as much as they can map it, because I think you'd agree a lot of the some of the CIS framework and some of the NIST stuff doesn't really capture the cloud world so much. There's a few things in there around physical security. So the Azure CIS benchmark is probably the one worthwhile reading if you're looking at that, because it focuses primarily from an Azure focus, and Microsoft have been involved there and working with the CIS to get that framework written. So yeah, that's well worth looking at. And obviously, if you use Security Center standard, it can automatically check your resources and tell you where your holes are, download some nice PDFs and all that straight from the portal. So yeah, really worthwhile looking at.
Yeah, definitely, and that's actually triggered another thing in my mind as well. So Security Center has baselines for PCI DSS compliance. It has baselines for ISO 27001 compliance. It has them for all kinds of stuff, and I know they're adding more and more all the time. They have a HIPAA baseline as well. If you store health data and you're in the United States, HIPAA is a huge thing in the States for access to health data and the security of that. So all of those things are available. I think it's just like everything else, it's knowing where to find them.
Yeah, some of them are in preview at the moment, absolutely. So, but like UK Official and UK NHS are two as well that are out there, and that's quite useful. But yeah, they're under the preview blade if you can't see them by default. So that's a top tip there. Go under the preview blade, and you'll be able to enable those. But yeah, I don't know if anybody else has got any questions. Anybody wants to be brave and come off mute and ask anything to Martyn or anything to any of us around security. If not, we'll pause for 5-10 seconds and we'll move on. Oh, we got a question from Steve here. So I was wondering about pipelines as code, YAML. Is it worth moving to these yet, or are these significantly behind the classical pipelines?
That's a really good question.
It's a great question.
It is a really good question. So in all honesty, I would say. So I'm mixed on this, if I'm honest, and I'll tell you why. So some of our pipelines have moved across to the YAML-only variants of them. And one of the reasons I actually had to do that was for .NET Core 3, because .NET Core 3 is not supported out of the box by the classic editor. So you have to put the task into preview mode for some reason. .NET Core 3 is not in preview. You have to use a preview task, which is a little odd. But so yeah, I personally I think it depends on your complexity of your pipelines. So if you are relying on a lot of third-party stuff in your pipelines, then I would say wait. If you are using a template with very little customization, then I would say go for YAML. Because that's where the new functionality is now landing first, rather than the classic pipeline editor.
Yeah, and you certainly look at like GitHub Actions, right? That's all YAML defined, and yeah, exactly. There's not a lot of classic editor there at all. So yeah, I was cutting my teeth on GitHub Actions the other day, and yeah, it's an experience if you're not from that code world like myself.
Yeah, it is, and you know, YAML's an interesting choice, I think, personally. So, you know, a little really quick bit of potted history on some of this. So Microsoft obviously went down the XML route for open documents a while ago. So they were cross-compatible with things like OpenOffice and such like that. And then the people that set the internet standards all of a sudden said, XML's not good enough anymore. We are now making you use JSON. And everyone went to JSON, and JSON's really great, actually. I like working with JSON. It's really easy to use. If you write ARM templates, you write in JSON. I find that a lot of people that would not call themselves developers pick up JSON a lot easier because it's quite descriptive. And a lot of that is down to how Microsoft have written the schema. I find YAML very similar, but it makes me wonder why not write the pipelines in JSON and choose YAML. I think it is because a lot of the other products like GitHub or like Bitbucket, if you're an Atlassian user, all of those tools basically use YAML. So it gives you a bit of cross-compatibility between some of those tools if you migrate over or integrate them together even. So I can only assume that's the reason they've done that. But Microsoft is so heavily invested in JSON as a data construct in so many other areas of Azure. It's an odd diversion, but I can see why they've done it. So yeah, I think my summary on that one is a bit of a long answer to that. Apologies, but my summary of that is if you're using a pure out-the-box template, go for it, because you can set it up really easily. You can migrate it over really easily. If you're using custom stuff and really custom stuff like that you've written yourself or third-party plugins, then don't forget that those third-party plugins may not yet have been updated to work with YAML pipelines. So you need to be careful there. There's nothing wrong with giving it a go and checking if it works, but just be wary that there may be a bit of rework if you do.
No, I think that's sound advice and a question that I was definitely on the tip of my tongue. So yeah, thanks for asking that, Steve. Any other questions from the audience? Anybody want to ask anything else? Okay, well, nothing just yet, so we're going to move on if that's okay. Ryan, do you want to hit the next slide?
Yeah, so this is just to call out the next session that we plan to run, and actually our next kind of speaker that's going to run this with us, Margaret, is on the session with us. So, Margaret, if you want to say hey quickly, you're more than welcome.
Hello.
Sorry
to
put you on the
looking
spot.
Forward to the next session. My next session will be about Azure Functions.
Cool. And as part of that, we're going to do a roundup on Microsoft Build as well. So that's running in the next couple of weeks. There's going to be a bunch of announcements there. Obviously, it's developer focused as well. So we'll do a bit of a roundup on some of the sessions that ran as part of that.
Absolutely, and I think moving on to the next slide, I think this is more to say check out our YouTube channel. So short link there. We need 100 subscribers before we can get a decent YouTube URL. So tell your friends, get them to subscribe, and we can put up a nice short YouTube link. But for now, that will get you there. All of our meetings from this year, I think, are there. So from January onwards, where we had Kyle Davis, a Citrix CTP, talk about Windows Virtual Desktop, obviously before the recent changes. But some really good theory there around the pros and cons of WVD versus Citrix and other third-party things. We had David Murphy from Akora talk around Azure Active Directory, and that was quite an interesting session. And then there was myself, Ryan, and Paul Grimley from Microsoft, who we had a sort of an open, honest chat around exam overviews. And if you've got a bit of time on your hands due to the current pandemic, our top tips around how to study for exams, and a really good open and honest discussion that went on for a good hour and a half, and some really nice questions from the audience as well. So if you're thinking about exams, go and check out that video. There's a lot of good tips in there. And of course, Martyn's awesome session from this evening will be up there as soon as me and Ryan get around to uploading it. So probably some point tomorrow or Friday.
Absolutely, and from the sessions that you've done, you probably can tell that it's quite varied. So please give us some feedback in terms of some of the content that you'd like to see. We're pretty open in terms of what we can put together, whether it's kind of deep technical on a specific Azure solution, or whether you want to know about like a migration journey from somebody that went from a very on-prem environment to transformed and modernized into the cloud. We're quite open to doing different kinds of content. So feedback really matters. So please let us know.
Cool, and I think that is it. We're going to try something different tonight, I think, Ryan, right? So generally we would end it here, but we finished about 15-20 minutes earlier than normal. So we really like to, I think the one thing that we're all missing from this is social interaction. And one of the greatest parts of running our user group is meeting people every month and having that chat, that water cooler style chat, to use a phrase, about things that have changed or things that you're working on. And we want to really open up the floor now for anybody that feels comfortable that come off mute, and we can chat about some recent things. So there's obviously been some big announcements this week. So Windows Virtual Desktop version 2 or spring release has been announced.
There's also the VMware version 2 in Azure as well. So it's a native VMware rather than a third party operating it. That's a fairly big announcement too.
Yeah, that's really big, and already some really interest in that from what I've seen so far. Now that it's native. So if anybody's got anything that they're working on or looking at, or anything that's interesting in their space, then feel free to come off mute. We're having a nice chat around it with the community. And if there's anything not related, just want to chat about the world and chat with some other people who are like-minded, then come. Let's have a little discussion. Okay, the silence is killing me, but it's we tried. This is what we've got to try these things. I think there's a new feature coming to Teams around breakout rooms. I've seen that mentioned. It's a feature in Zoom that people have got, and people are breaking off into separate discussion rooms, and I think that'd be really powerful for some of these community events where you can always break off into little groups and go and discuss things. I saw that on the user voice stuff that it was picking up traction, so that'll be interesting to see if that promotes a little bit more collaboration.
Speaking of Teams, I quite like. I don't know if it's in the main ring yet, but the raise your hand feature I think is quite good in these kind of talks where there's a lot of people on. I don't know if everyone's got that yet, but you can raise your hand if you've got a question or you want to kind of dive into the conversation when there's already dialogue happening. I think that's quite a cool feature that's starting to work in some of the meetings I've been having.
Yeah, I think certainly some of the meetings I've been having with sort of big audiences internally have been really interesting to see when people have been raising their hands. I think finding people who've raised their hands is difficult, but yeah, I think it's a good feature to have so far.
Absolutely.
I was going to
go for it.
So I was going to come back to Martyn's point actually about the YAML, the question I raised earlier. One of the big things that I've been looking at is around the notifications and that in the YAML, and it just doesn't seem to be there yet for the approval gates and approving after the event. I was wondering if you had any insight on that and coming soon. I know that there's a lot of changes and the roadmap has it in, but it seems to be some killer features just missing from the YAML side.
Yeah, there definitely is. You're right to pick that up. I know one of the things that is coming really soon, so Q2, so it should be here anytime now. Actually, is multi-repo support for YAML pipelines, and that kind of just goes to show some of the basic functionality I think you're talking about, where previously, if you're using the classic editor, if you have source from two places, you can pull them both in at the same time really nice and easily. If you wanted to do that in YAML, you have to separate out into two pipelines, but that is something that is in progress. There is a public roadmap, actually. I don't know if you know the public roadmap for your DevOps. I'll put it into the chat.
Yeah, I've been looking at that, and the other one was the approval gates as well. Only seem to be on entry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's
exit,
no post.
You've got to create a second environment and put it on that. It seems.
Yes, that's yeah. So other than confirm, yes, that is correct. I don't know if that's going to be changed at all in the future. I've not seen it being logged as feedback anywhere either, actually. So if you have a channel in through your account team, if you have one or anything, I would definitely recommend submitting that through, because they can obviously get it to the right people.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would probably say is obviously build round the corner. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few updates to come. Standard Microsoft practice. Everything queues up before Ignite and it all comes out. So, maybe well worth seeing what comes out in the next couple of weeks. Build looks great. The fact they're running it on 3 different time zones as well this year, I think is really, really nice to see. So yeah, you definitely watch out there, and it's free to sign up. So get a registration in and watch the recordings. And, if you can join live, then awesome, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of this stuff announced at Build.
Absolutely. I mean, it's great that a lot of these kind of typical face-to-face events are going online and through webinars as well. I'm seeing it across multiple events, and it's really good to see. And actually, it makes it much easier for us to consume them in these times where we wouldn't normally be there in person.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all changes once we're out of this, in terms of what events do in the future.
So another quick update that I've got to mention on our side. So after the talk that we're going to do on build and functions versus logic apps, we've actually got a speaker from GitHub that's going to do a session on not just GitHub, but the new integrations with Azure, so test plans and all that kind of goodness. Also some of the checking that it does of security in code as well, which is kind of linked to Martyn's session too. So that should be early June, but we'll confirm dates shortly. So hopefully there'll be some interest in that.
Yeah, we had a chat with the potential speaker a couple of days ago, and it was really interesting to see the passion he had for the upcoming features and things that are announced. So yeah, it'd be really great to go into that. And I know there'll be a lot of hot topic questions in that session that hopefully Build have answered before we get our poor speaker on. Cool. Okay. Well, I think that draws us nicely to a close. Thank you all for joining, as always, and please share and give us your feedback. Really important that this is open to as many people as want to join as possible. It'll be recorded on YouTube, so feel free to reshare and repost all over the socials. It really does help, and we just want to get the message out there and obviously get everybody as a community back together in these challenging times. And with that, thank you for your time.
And thanks, Martyn, as well, for spending the evening with us. Really appreciate it, Martyn.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks again for the invite.
No problem. We'll get you that beer when you're back down in Crawley.
I'm from the north. I definitely don't remember free beer. Don't forget free beer.
Absolutely. No, we look forward to having you down at the Use Group in person. All right. Well, thank you very much, all, and stay safe.
Thanks, all.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers, all. Thanks.